Addams Family Values. Imagine an eerie moonlit night. Ghostly mist rises from a creepy cemetery. Beyond the crumbling headstones, a huge, spooky mansion stands against the sky. From inside the shadowy building, weird sounds echo into the darkness. Somewhere, an animal howls mournfully. Suddenly, someone screams. In other words, just a normal night at the Addams family house. Little did I know that soon our lives would be anything but normal. It all began right there in our living room, when my mother turned to my father and told him something really scary. She said, "Gomez, I'm going to have a baby." What's so scary about someone having a baby? Well, first of all, you have to know my family, the Addams family. My name is Wednesday. My little brother is Pugsley. We live in the Addams family mansion with my mother, Morticia, my father, Gomez, Uncle Fester, Granny, Lurch the butler, and of course Thing, our handyman. Actually, Thing's more of a handy hand. I suppose we're really like any family. We like to do things together, laugh together, and polish the guillotine in the family dungeon together, just the same as anyone else. For instance, when my mother went to the hospital to have the baby, we all went along, like any family would. We sat in the waiting room together, trying to guess if it would be a boy or a girl, or maybe something nobody had even thought of. Then at last, Father came rushing into the waiting room. "Father," I asked, "what is it?" He took a deep breath and replied, "It's an Addams." He was so proud I thought he'd explode. Now that would have been interesting. At home, we all pitched in to fix up the nursery. It had all the trimmings, peeling wallpaper, cracked mirrors, lots of spiders, and a dusty old black crib. When Mother came home with our new baby brother, she was really surprised. So was Pugsley when I told him what was going to happen next. Everyone knows that when people have a new baby, one of the other children has to go. It's a tradition, I told him. He asked me which of us would have to leave. Well, I said, they only need one boy. During the next few weeks, Pugsley and I tried to get used to having Pubert around. That's what our parents named him, Pubert. Can you believe it? A homely baby like that, getting such a great name. Anyway, we did our best to include Pubert in our games, even though we thought he was there to replace one of us. For example, we let him join our Victims of the French Revolution game. We even let him be one of the victims. We also made sure Pubert was part of the fun when we did our gravity experiment from the roof of the house. But Father caught him before he could hit the ground. Of course, that ruined the experiment. When Mother found out what we were doing to Pubert, she thought it was because we were jealous. That's when Father decided Mother needed someone to help her look after the family. The first 3 nannies who came to work at our house just didn't seem to be cut out for the job. They all left pretty quickly, usually through a window, yelling hysterically. Then someone new arrived, someone different. Her name was Debbie. She seemed young, pretty, and sweet. But I suppose none of that was really her fault. Unlike all the other nannies, Debbie fit right in. She seemed quite fond of Pubert, at least once he stopped growling. She liked me and Pugsley too, and all the rest of the family. But out of everyone, Debbie liked Uncle Fester the most. Short, ugly, unbathed, bald as a hubcap Uncle Fester. What kind of woman could possibly resist a man like that? Uncle Fester liked Debbie too, but he was so shy he could hardly even talk to her. Still, anyone with eyes could see he was falling in love. I had eyes, all right. Buckets of them. Then one day, Mother, Father, and Uncle Fester all went out on an errand. As soon as they left, I saw Debbie sneak into Uncle Fester's room, where she pulled a bunch of folders and papers out of his desk. They all had to do with Uncle Fester's gold and money and stocks and bonds. She seemed very pleased. Later that day, I asked Debbie if she was a real nanny. She said, "What a question." Then I asked why she came to stay with us, and she told me it was to take care of us, all of us. Especially my Uncle Fester, I asked. She didn't answer, but just gave me a mean look. The very next morning, Debbie told my parents a terrible lie. It was probably the most terrible lie a person could tell someone's parents. She said that Pugsley and I had asked to be sent to summer camp. The next thing I knew, Pugsley and I were being stranded in the wilderness at a place called Camp Chippewa. All around us was fresh air, pine trees, and dozens of bright-eyed, well-dressed, happy kids from the suburbs. It was my worst nightmare come true. A stuck-up girl named Amanda was staring at me. She looked like an advertisement for Best-Dressed Camper of the Year. She came over and asked why I was wearing black, like somebody died. "Just wait," I told her. Then we met Gary and Becky, the directors of Camp Chippewa. They smiled too much and had so much energy I thought they were going to fizz up and evaporate. At least, I hoped they were going to fizz up and evaporate. The only good thing about that first day at camp was meeting Joel, if you can call Joel a good thing. He was thin and frail and had allergies so bad he could hardly breathe. I liked that in a boy. He told his mom he didn't want to stay at Camp Chippewa. That's when I knew we were going to be friends. Back at home, Uncle Fester finally found the courage to ask Debbie out for dinner. It must have been quite a date, because the very next day, Uncle Fester had something amazing to tell my mother and father. "Gomez, Morticia," he shouted. "Great news, a miracle." Father said, "That nasty rash, it's gone?" "No," Uncle Fester replied. "The impossible has happened. Debbie and I are engaged." And I thought nothing could be worse than Camp Chippewa. That night, Debbie was in her room at our house watching TV. The program was America's Most Disgusting Unsolved Crimes. Who says there's nothing educational on network television? Suddenly, Debbie saw her own picture on the screen. The announcer described her as what the police call a black widow killer, the kind of woman who goes around the country marrying wealthy men and then murdering them for their money. Finally, the announcer explained that no one knew her real identity or her whereabouts because she was a master of disguise. Unfortunately for Uncle Fester, Debbie was the only person in the house watching TV that night. At Camp Chippewa, things were going downhill. First, I found out that Uncle Fester and Debbie were about to be married. Then Gary and Becky, the camp directors, got mad at Pugsley and me. We refused to join in what they called a group hug. "We don't hug," I told them. Becky said we were just too shy. "We aren't shy," I told her. "We're contagious." What happened next is almost too gruesome to tell. We were sentenced to the dreaded Harmony Hut. It was like a little prison. The walls were covered with all kinds of frightening things, like colorful posters with kittens, rainbows, and little troll dolls holding flowers. Serious mental torture. Pugsley was terrified. He whispered, "How long do we have to stay here?" "Till we crack," I told him. Late that night, Pugsley, Joel, and I dressed up in black, like ninjas, and made a break for it. We were almost over the Camp Chippewa fence when sirens started to wail, guard dogs barked, and searchlights flashed through the forest. We were caught. The other campers surrounded us. They all wanted us to be punished for trying to escape back to our families. But Gary and Becky had something more fiendish in mind. "Campers," Gary told them, "you know what I think our little ninja friends need. Do you know what just might turn their sad and potentially wasted little lives around?" "What?" Joel asked, with a shudder. Before we could protect ourselves, all the campers locked arms together around us. Then they did something unspeakable. They sang, "Kumbaya." The rest is a blank. While we were stuck at Camp Chippewa, Debbie was back at our house having her bridal shower. All the female Addams relations were there. Cousin It's wife Margaret arrived with her new baby, What. The Siamese twins, Flora and Fauna, came, along with Ophelia and Aphasia Addams. Meanwhile, Father was hosting a bachelor party for Uncle Fester. Besides Lurch and Thing, the guests included Cousin It, Lumpy the Hunchback, and our two-headed friend Donald and Dexter. They were having quite a time. The part they all liked best was a movie starring a very large lady belly dancer. The men yelled, "Take it off," so she did. She took her head right off and threw it out of the movie screen and into Uncle Fester's arms. Now that's entertainment. Later that night, Debbie went to see Uncle Fester. As she entered his room, she told him it was bad luck for the groom to see the bride, so Uncle Fester shut his eyes. He said he wished he could look at her pretty face, but she wouldn't let him. Then she asked Uncle Fester to sign her wedding album, saying it was an old family tradition. Uncle Fester said he would, even though he couldn't see what he was signing with his eyes closed. Debbie guided Uncle Fester's hand so he could sign what she was holding. But it wasn't her wedding album. It was a fake copy of Uncle Fester's will, and it had just 3 words on it. Debbie gets everything. Finally, the day of the wedding arrived. Pugsley and I were given a pass from Camp Chippewa so we could attend. I asked my new friend Joel to come along too. The ceremony was held out back in our family cemetery, where Lurch played the organ and the guests sat on tombstones. Cousin It was the minister, and he'd prepared a lovely ceremony. But Debbie seemed to be in a rush to get the wedding vows over with. Finally, Uncle Fester and Debbie both said, "I do." Suddenly, lightning flashed, thunder rumbled, and the earth shook. Then, Granny burped baby Pubert, and everything quieted down again. In front of the house, Uncle Fester's car had the usual wedding decorations tied to the bumper. Tin cans, streamers, and something that might have been a body. Father waved to the 2 newlyweds as they drove away, saying, "You're going to have a wonderful life together." Debbie waved back. She was smiling a funny kind of smile. Uncle Fester was hoping for a romantic honeymoon in Death Valley. Debbie made them go to Hawaii instead. Yuck. Then she forced Uncle Fester to do the one thing he hated most, take a bath. While he was in the tub, she actually tried to electrocute him by dropping a boombox into the water. Naturally, that only made Uncle Fester love her more. I was back at Camp Chippewa when I received some shocking news. It was a note from Uncle Fester saying, "Dear Wednesday, I love you dearly, but I can never see you again." Of course, it was Debbie's doing. She'd made Uncle Fester promise to never see any of his beloved family ever again. She also started spending Uncle Fester's money to buy a shiny new limousine, a big new house, and horrid new furniture. Finally, she made poor Uncle Fester dress up in a trendy silk suit and wear a ridiculous toupee on his head. He was baffled, he was miserable, he was in love, and trapped like a rat. One afternoon, Debbie lured Uncle Fester into the swimming pool, even though she knew he couldn't swim. He practically drowned, but as you'd expect, that just made him fall more deeply in love. Suddenly, life at Camp Chippewa took a horrifying turn. Camp Director Gary wrote a preposterous Thanksgiving play about the Indians befriending the Pilgrims. As if that weren't bad enough, he forced me to play the part of Pocahontas. When I told Gary what I thought of his play, he threw me and Pugsley and Joel into the Harmony Hut and tried to break our spirits by making us watch Disney cartoons. By the time they let us out again, I had a plan. I told Gary I really wanted to be perky and sing and dance and be Pocahontas in his wonderful play. And then I did something I never thought I could do. It took all my concentration, but I finally managed it. I actually smiled. Guess what? They bought it. Back at our unhappy home, something very strange had happened to baby Pubert. He had changed. No longer was he the pasty-faced, demonic, flame-breathing creature we all loved and cherished. Overnight, his cheeks had become rosy, his hair turned golden. He even lost his little mustache. Father was stunned. "What's happened to my baby?" he cried. Granny knew. Pubert was possessed. She tried a powerful ancient spell to help him. It called for soil from a grave, fresh zebra blood, and a diet soda. Granny got thirsty. But her spell didn't do any good. "That's funny," she said. "It works on cats." Then she realized what was causing all the trouble. It was because the Addams family wasn't a family without Uncle Fester. We had to bring him back, or be trapped for eternity with the unthinkable, a sweet-faced little baby that gurgles and grins. At the house where Uncle Fester and Debbie lived, Uncle Fester was excited because it was their 3-week anniversary. His present to Debbie was going to be a big, fancy dinner that he cooked himself. When Debbie came into the kitchen, she had a present for him, too. It was a time bomb, wrapped up to look like a gift. Then, Debbie said she had to go out and get some champagne for their celebration. She had written a list telling him to cook dinner, seal all doors and windows, turn on gas jets, wait for Debbie. As Debbie left, Uncle Fester asked if she was coming right back. She picked up 2 big suitcases on her way out and said, "Of course." Neither one of them noticed there was someone watching all this through the kitchen window. That someone was Thing. Meanwhile, back at camp, we were all getting ready to perform Gary's ghastly play. The audience was filled with eager parents, and Gary and Becky were proudly waiting in the wings. The play began, and I came on stage dressed as Pocahontas. I was supposed to say that the Indians were happy to share their food and land with the Pilgrims. But instead, I told them we knew the Pilgrims had come to steal our Indian land and force us to live in mobile homes on reservations. "The gods of my tribe have spoken," I told them, "and instead of breaking bread with you, we have decided to scalp you and burn your village to the ground." Then Joel and some of the other misfit campers attacked. They whooped war cries and shot flaming arrows that set the theater on fire. Gary and Becky screamed and shouted. The parents in the audience panicked. It was the best play I'd ever seen. Outside of Uncle Fester's house, Debbie was sitting in her car. She wanted to be there when her present to Uncle Fester went off. She checked her watch. Then, right on time, kaboom, the whole house was blown to bits. Right on time, walking out of the smoke, who should appear but Uncle Fester? Even though his face was smudged with soot, he was fine. He asked Debbie if she bought the champagne. Debbie was furious. She pulled out a gun. Uncle Fester asked if this meant that she didn't love him. Debbie laughed for about 10 minutes and then aimed the gun at Uncle Fester. Just as she was about to shoot, a car came speeding down the road and knocked her into the bushes. Thing was driving the car. As he and Uncle Fester drove away, Debbie shouted after them, "I'll get you, and your little hand, too." While sneaking away from Camp Chippewa for the last time, Joel and I shared a final, tender moment together. The flames from the burning theater illuminated the sky, as he said he'd never forget me. "You won't?" I asked. "No," he answered. "You're too weird to forget." By the time Pugsley and I got home, Uncle Fester was there with my mother and father and the rest of the household. The Addams family was complete again. Suddenly, we heard a familiar voice from the doorway. It was Debbie. "In-laws," she said. She didn't sound happy, and she was holding a big machine gun. The next thing we knew, Debbie had tied us each into our very own electric chair in the attic. She was going to fry us all with zillions of volts of electricity. Even worse, before she did it, she was going to make us watch slides of her childhood. Debbie raved and ranted and showed us pictures of herself as a little girl. She explained that her life was shattered when she asked her parents for a ballerina Barbie doll, and they gave her a Malibu Barbie instead. Well, that explained everything. No wonder she became a serial killer who bumped off all her husbands. As Debbie prepared to electrocute us, we all said our goodbyes to each other, and then everyone wished Debbie good luck. After all, it was the polite thing to do. Finally, she threw the switch. What none of us had noticed is that baby Pubert had crawled in among the electrical cords and chewed up the wires. Somehow, this reversed the current, so instead of zapping us, the electricity flowed right back into Debbie. She lit up like the 4th of July. Afterwards, there was nothing left but 2 earrings and some melted credit cards. Nine months later, Pubert was back to his normal, unholy self. We had all gathered together to celebrate his very first birthday. That night, Cousin Ed arrived with his wife, their baby, and their new nanny. You know what? She was totally bald. And as soon as Uncle Fester saw her, he was totally in love. Again. A big cake was brought in, and we told Pubert to blow out the candle. He took a big breath and blew. When he did, the whole house exploded with a terrific roar. Now that's what I call an Addams family birthday surprise.